Turkey ramps up its fight against the Gulen organization as it seizes 80 suspects from more than a dozen countries. Kosovo says Ankara has gone too far. I'm Imran Garta, and today's newsmaker is Kosovo-Turkey tensions. 6 Turkish citizens have been snatched from the streets of Kosovo and taken back to Turkey. And the Balkan nation is far from impressed. Kosovo's foreign ministry says the operation contravened international norms. But Turkey's president's hit back, accusing the country of defending coup plotters. To make matters worse, Kosovo's prime minister says he had no idea what was going on. In fact, he sacked his interior minister and spy chief for keeping him in the dark about it. So, are Turkey's efforts to defeat Fethullah Gulen's organization straining diplomatic ties? Or has this incident exposed a rift within the Kosovo government? That debate in a moment, but first here's Sandra Gatman.
On the morning of March 29th, 6 Turkish men living in Kosovo suddenly disappeared. This was the moment they were captured in a covert operation orchestrated by Turkey's intelligence agency with the help of Kosovo's secret service. The men reappeared 2 days later in Turkey. 5 are teachers, 1 is a doctor. They're accused by the government of recruiting for the Gulen organization, which Turkey says was behind a failed coup in 2016. They're also accused of helping members escape from Turkey. But back in Pristina, there was fallout. Kosovo's Prime Minister Ramush Haradinaj fired his interior minister and intelligence chief for failing to inform him about the deportations, and he accused Turkey of meddling. But Turkey's president saw the sackings as a snub.
Kosova'nın başbakanı, kimin talimatıyla sen böyle bir adım attın? Ne zamandan beri Türkiye Cumhuriyeti'ne darbe yapmaya gayret edenleri korumaya başladın? Kosova'yı bir kardeş olarak bağrına basan Türkiye'ye darbe girişiminde bulunan bu adamları sen koynunda nasıl beslersin? Bunun hesabını sen de vereceksin.
Turkey has been one of Kosovo's key allies. It was one of the first countries to recognize Kosovo's independence and has poured millions of dollars into Kosovo's weak economy. But there has been recent pressure from Ankara to assist in its global crackdown on the Gulen organization and its network. It's believed nearly 1,500 children attend Gulenist-funded schools in Kosovo. The president's son even attended one, the Mehmet Akif College, where 5 of the arrested teachers worked. Turkey's deputy prime minister says the recent arrests were a great favor to Kosovo and a security move to protect against the Gulen network, which Turkey sees as a vast and dangerous terror organization that's permeated its military, judicial, and education systems. Its exiled leader, Fethullah Gulen, denies trying to overthrow the Turkish state. But Turkey has continued to crack down on his group, arresting more than 40,000 Gulen suspects and sacking more than 100,000 civil servants. This week, Turkey announced it's arrested 80 suspected Gulenists in 18 countries around the world. But critics in Kosovo say Turkey's cross-border arrests were a step too far and fear the men risk being tortured. An official committee has been set up to investigate the operation, which could put Kosovo and Turkey's friendship to the test. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers.
Well, to debate this, I'm joined here in the studio by Egemen Bağış. He's Turkey's former Minister of EU Affairs. And with him, Elis Cevori. He's a digital producer at TRT World and an expert in the Balkans. And completing our panel from the Albanian capital, Tirana, is Egon Malici. He's a civil society activist, policy analyst, and creator of the news website Spunker. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Egemen Bağış, let me start with you. People, read the headlines. Turkey went in, nabbed 6 people who were their citizens, but were in another country. Was it the right thing to do?
Of course, Turkey cooperated with the local authorities with the full blessing of the president of the country and the intelligence authorities and the relevant ministry. And it was a joint mission to help countries and ally-friendly countries fight against terrorism. FETÖ is one of the deadliest terrorist organizations that has harmed the well-being of this country. They have attempted a coup where they took the lives of more than 250 people overnight on July 15th, 2 years ago. And Turkey has declared them to be enemies of the state for quite a while and expects naturally from all friendly allied countries to cooperate in the fight against terrorism.
Let me ask
Turkey
you,
has been there for Kosovo from day one. Turkey is one of the first countries to recognize the sovereignty and independence of Kosovo.
That's a good point. That's a good point. And that's part of the debate, right, where Turkey has been a huge supporter of Kosovo. And that's why there's tension now. And a lot of Turks are saying, hey, you know, you're biting the hand that feeds you in many ways, right? But let me ask you, these guys were not in the tanks on the night of July 15th, 2016. I mean, we look at their professions.
Okay. First, we don't know if they were actually in the tanks or not.
Okay.
There were some school teachers who were also
and a doctor.
Were involved, but they were very instrumental in financing those who prepared the coup. They were very instrumental in helping those who were trying to escape from Turkey through using the Kosovo as a stepping stone and go into other parts of the world, other European countries or countries on the other side of the Atlantic. And these guys were against the well-being of Republic of Turkey. And the evidence presented by Turkish authorities, by Turkish Interior Ministry and Turkish intelligence were compelling enough to the Ministry of Interior Affairs and to the intelligence and to the President of Kosovo that they cooperated in this mission together. It's okay when the United States goes all the way to Pakistan and picks up bin Laden and throws him into the ocean. It's okay when Israel goes to all around the world to find former members of the Nazi party. But when Turkey is going to a neighboring country that enjoys great and fruitful relations, somehow there's reaction.
Well, there was a reaction from the Prime Minister himself, and we're going to get to that in a moment.
Well, that's a domestic issue within Kosovo. I mean, it's not my job nor your job to...
But on the books, he's the most powerful man in the country. And he says, nobody told me about this.
That's his problem with the people who were supposed to tell him. Understood. That's my problem.
Okay, we're going to get into that in a moment. Egon Malici, is that how you see this? Turkey has a group that it's fighting, right, which was involved in a coup d'etat attempt that killed more than 250 people. They operate in many ways like a criminal organization underground, and Turkey found enough grounds to go and nab them because they were a threat to the state, and there were authorities within Kosovo that cooperated enough for it to happen. Is that how you see it?
That's certainly, I guess, the interpretation of the Turkish government regarding sort of this Gulenist movement. The way, the perspective from Kosovo on the situation is that obviously Turkey is a staunch ally, a strong strategic partner of Kosovo from the beginning, as you mentioned. And that there's a strong interest among Kosovo's people to sort of continue this strategic alliance with Turkey. Especially in this, from a geopolitical perspective, this is a very important moment for Kosovo because we are in our final lap to sort of consolidating our statehood, which is still contested, and we are in the final stages of negotiations with Serbia, so we need the support of countries like Turkey. However, the problem is that this situation has put Kosovo in a tough spot because Kosovo, although it values the strategic partnership with Turkey, it also aspires to join the European Union, and it has a sort of, it's aspiring to build a liberal democracy. Constitutionally, it's a liberal democracy. And the problem in this particular case has been the sort of the extrajudicial nature of the process, which has raised concerns among civil society activists, journalists.
Hasn't Kosovo, sorry to interrupt you, hasn't Kosovo put itself in a tight spot? Because you have the interior minister and the spy chief, and most probably the president, Hashim Thaçi, for all indications, saying, yes, do it. And the prime minister saying, nobody told me. It's Kosovo's problem. It has nothing to do with Turkey, right?
It's Kosovo, sort of Kosovo's authorities. The problem is that there's been a lack of transparency into who and how this was ordered. The Kosovan parliament has yesterday established a commission to investigate how this has happened. The normal way it should have happened for a country like Kosovo that is sort of attempting to abide by rule of law is that it did not go through the sort of extradition kind of process whereby the courts would have handled it. It went through the intelligence agency, which declared the people at hand as threats to national security, and the internal affairs minister canceled their residence permit, and then they were sort of immediately taken over without the courts being involved in any of the process. So the concern from human rights activists, democracy activists, has been that there was no due process to give them sort of an opportunity to sort of defend their case. Right. Kosovo's constitution, by the constitution, we are obliged we oblige ourselves also to adhere to the European Convention on Human Rights.
Right.
So there has been genuine grassroots concern, reflected also in the Prime Minister's position, because yes, it is an internal power struggle. But it also reflects sort of the attitude of public opinion in Kosovo, which, although it highly values Turkey's sort of the strategic partner, and we do see Turkey as a strategic partner, we also have these concerns regarding the sort of human rights dimensions.
Okay, so Ellis, is that at the heart of all of this? The fact that you actually have Hashim Thaçi saying these Turkish citizens had committed crimes in Kosovo, and then you have Ramush Haradinaj, the Prime Minister, on the other hand, saying these guys were stolen. Is the real scandal the fact that the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing and that there's a power struggle happening within Kosovo, rather than the fact that Turkey went in, as some Kosovo Albanians would say, extrajudicially to take these men?
You're quite right on that point, actually, and Agon just mentioned it as well, in that there is an internal power struggle inside Kosovo. Up until very recently, the head of the spy agency in Kosovo was generally appointed by members that were affiliated with Hashim Thaçi. And although in paper, the head of the intelligence agency responds to the Prime Minister, or answers to the Prime Minister, actually, generally he was considered in the pocket of the president of Kosovo. And so, yeah, there is a power struggle in Kosovo regarding this. And I think the whole situation, or it's very likely that the situation with these 6 people is actually being used for internal political purposes to try and gain access to some of these institutions by Ramush Haradinaj, the Prime Minister of Kosovo. But more broadly, actually, there is probably an internal discussion that both Kosovo and Albania need to have on people from the Gulenist organization, or FETÖ. And this is actually potentially a serious problem. In Albania, for instance, they control the Muslim community there, so the organization that's Muslim community there. They have 12 schools, they have a university, they have a hospital, they have advisors inside the military.
So you believe they're really big in Albania?
They are quite big in Albania, actually. And there needs to be a discussion in society. Is this organization accountable? And is it accountable to whom? And this is quite problematic because it's operating in the shadows.
Right, it brings about an interesting question. Let me ask Egemen Bash, because you've been involved in the United States, you've been involved in Europe, translating, expressing the Turkish message. People within these countries say, I'm sorry, but these people just build schools. They have hospitals. I don't see what the problem is. You're saying these are terrorists. We just see schools and we see kids who graduate from school and everything seems fine. What's your problem?
When we realized how big of a problem this was, it was a bit late for us. We're warning them. They are infiltrating into their government system as well, through their students, through their NGOs, through their hospitals, and they act like they're good guys. But realistically, they are very, very bad guys. I've been a victim of the Gulenist attacks for years, and I know how deep they can go, how dirty they can get, and how dangerous they are. So we're warning. Even the United States, they have 150 schools in the US, 120 of them are around the military bases. So they're trying to access the US military through their kids. In Albania, they are now trying to infiltrate into the system. One wonders, why would the prime minister of a country choose to create an animosity with 80 million Turks and with one of the strongest governments in the region over these terrorists who are...
But maybe no proof was given to him. I mean, would you concede that maybe he wasn't given a strong enough argument?
Or maybe he doesn't want to analyze the evidence.
Right. But you would understand if we're saying that...
one wonders if he has other ties to them.
Okay, but it's interesting. If you're saying they're so sort of nefarious and under the surface and that's how they operate, and it's true, right? They operate in the shadows. It's difficult then to pin anything strongly to them, right? So well, maybe he's waiting for something that's
strong. Go ask
strong.
the families of the 250 people who lost their lives 2 years ago on the coup attempt. Go ask the people who have been following them and who have been analyzing their actions, who have been writing books on them. These guys have even fooled us for many, many years. They changed the information on intelligence records about some of our top brass military, some business people, some high-level politicians, and they try to create a false image by accusing people of wrongdoings, but they are the most wrongdoers themselves. These guys are involved in an international scheme.
Right. I want to ask you about what Fethullah Gulen himself said in a video. He said hijackers have hijacked people from Kosovo. In a way, when you hear that, does that sound to you as if he's already implicitly or maybe even explicitly claiming them as members?
He's directly claiming them as members. And these guys are not, well, we will see their testimonies. They're not going to probably deny that they've been a part of it because they've been involved since childhood. The Gulenists is not a new organization. They've been around since 1967. Was the first time Gulen was asked to establish an association to fight against communism. Since then, he's been involved in an international effort. And since 1999, when he moved to the US, he has globalized his mission. Prior to that, most of the schools were in predominantly Turkish-speaking countries of the former Soviet Union and different cities of Turkey and the Balkans. But after that, he has opened schools in 160 countries, around 1,800 schools. And if you can imagine that they are exchanging currencies in the system and they are controlling billions of dollars through schools, through hospitals, through businesses, through NGOs. This is a huge network. If you and I wanted to open a school in 5 different countries, believe me, top intelligence agencies of the world would be after our neck to see what we were doing. These guys have even a greater network than the one of Vatican. So one wonders who's behind them and for what purpose.
Okay, let me ask you, Ellis, the point that Agon made. He said in Kosovo right now, what the Prime Minister is saying in his outrage reflects what civil society is saying in terms of, okay, well, Turkey, it's fine that you have a problem with Feto. It's fine that you have a problem with the Gulenists, but we care about due process when it comes to people in our country, on our land. Is Agon right that this is the debate that's happening right now within Kosovo? People are going, come on, you can't just come into our country and take people and leave.
So one thing I would say in regards to civil society is in Albania, in Kosovo, sorry, in many ways is detached from the population. So we'd have to also see what the population actually thinks of this. So that's firstly the point I would say. Secondly is the civil society wasn't this outraged when Camp Bondsteel, which is one of the largest American military bases in the Balkans, was being used for extrajudicial flights from people that were being sent to Guantanamo Bay. And this was recorded by Amnesty International. And civil society, by and large, was very quiet then. And now civil society has become very alarmist. And actually, this is In Kosovo in particular, quite a few issues are mixing up, in which there is a large degree of dislike of Turkey amongst some members in civil society, and this is what's partly driving this.
Okay,
and so there's various things are mixing up.
That's interesting. So Egon, is some of this being driven by the fact that there is a deep dislike of Turkish society within certain sectors of Kosovo?
I would disagree with that. Of course, there might be a minority segment that might share some sort of Turkophobic sentiment, but I think there's a deep, strong tie, historic tie also between Kosovo and Albanians in general with Turkey. And even if you look at surveys, for example, the Kosovo Center for Security Studies just published a few months ago a survey on strategic partners. Around 70% of people in Kosovo will say that Turkey is friendly or very friendly. The concern is that we are a bit sensitive right now, especially as a country that's trying to establish itself in the international arena, and having to struggle, having this battle with Serbia, is on this issue of sovereignty and in a sort of our assertiveness in international affairs. So, and I think Prime Minister Haradinaj, in his statements and actions, merely was not in any way trying to provoke, I think, Turkey or with his statements. He merely asked sort of for responsibility because there was a lack of clarity in terms of how the process went. And even in reactions to President Erdogan's statements, sort of merely did not try to raise this into any kind of conflict, which I don't think either side is sort of interested in making this sort of a bilateral sort of conflict, because as I said, we are strategic partners. And I think that Kosovars are generally only trying to state that this is, to have a sovereign stance on this, to state that while we value the strategic partnership with Turkey deeply, we have a different, maybe different understanding of how the nature of the state should be. And I agree with Aris that, we've, in the past, we might have sort of tolerated some, or as a society, some human rights abuses, and there might be a degree of hypocrisy here and there. But there is a genuine interest among in society for Kosovo to continue the European path and join the European Union.
Okay.
And by doing what the Kosovo authorities have done in this case, we've gotten a strong reaction because we're maybe the only country in Europe that has agreed to this kind of extrajudicial process.
Okay, understood. Egon, I'm running out of time.
Sort of a negative reaction from the European Union.
Egon,
and that puts us.
Strong reaction from the European Union, and I'm sorry, I know you all want to chime in. I want to save my last question for Egemen Bağış. I apologize. Ellis, not sidelining you, but Egemen Bağış, talking about the European Union, you were at the table with them for many years, negotiating. This came from EU spokeswoman Maja Kocijancic. She said the arrest and subsequent deportation of 6 Turkish nationals legally residing in Kosovo raised questions about the respect of the due process of law. The rule of law is a fundamental principle of the European Union. If you were at the table with Maja, how would you respond to her?
First of all, to respond to Egon, strategic partners do not provide safe havens to enemies of state of their partners. Second, to our friends in European Union, they are always a day late and a dollar short in understanding what's happening in Turkey. If you ask anyone in Turkey, 80 million people are united. Government, opposition, leftists, rightists, opposition, everyone is united in believing that Gülenists are responsible for most of the problems this country is going through, and especially for what happened with the coup attempt, where we lost more than 250 lives. So European Union has to understand that a candidate member and a full member of NATO is having issues, a challenge in its fight against terrorism, and Gülenists are terrorists. So instead of trying to create an empathy, trying to support terrorist organizations, they should, for God's sake, once try to side with their allies, with the legitimate and democratically elected government of Turkey, rather than terrorists.
Okay.
Unfortunately, they have not even extradited one single PKK member, one single DHKPC member or FETÖ member to Turkey, although 2 of those organizations are already on the list of terrorist organizations of the European Union.
Okay.
So
strongly
they
put.
are at a great controversy with themselves.
Okay, well, we hope we can get a response from them at some point and have them on the same show with you.
Love to do it.
That would be wonderful. Okay, gentlemen, I'm out of time. I have to move on, but it's been a pleasure talking to all of you. I thank you all for taking the time. Egon Malici, Egemen Bash, and Elis Javori. Thanks for joining us on the Newsmakers. Still to come, unlikely allies unveiled. Are Saudi Arabia and Israel forging a new relationship to fight a common enemy? And should Marine Le Pen have attended a memorial for a Holocaust survivor murdered last month? We ask a member of her party, the far-right National Front. Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince doesn't seem afraid to make his mark, and his latest statements about Israel have certainly done that. Mohammed bin Salman declared that Israelis have the right to their own land. Even though the kingdom doesn't officially acknowledge Israel's existence, right now Riyadh and Tel Aviv have no formal diplomatic relations, but are shared interests bringing the two closer together. For more, here's Adil Halim.
He's been called the Great Reformer, from fighting corruption at home to bringing back movie theaters to the kingdom and, of course, allowing women to drive. But Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is making international headlines for what seems to be one of his boldest moves. The prince says Israelis have the right to live on their own land, a rare statement by an Arab leader. MBS, as he's known, made the comment in a recent interview with a U.S. magazine. I believe the Palestinians and the Israelis have the right to have their own land, but we have to have a peace agreement to assure the stability for everyone and to have normal relations. More often than not, Saudi Arabia and Israel are viewed like this, at odds. But in an epic plot twist, the two appear to have become strange bedfellows. Yet officially, Saudi Arabia does not recognize Israel. The obvious shared interest between the two countries, their shared dislike of Iran. Tehran's influence in the region continues to grow, much to Saudi Arabia and Israel's dismay. For example, in Yemen, Saudi Arabia supports the internationally recognized government, but Iran backs the Houthi rebels. In Syria, the opposite is true. Saudi supports the rebels, while Iran backs the regime. While Saudi Arabia and Israel would be hard-pressed to publicly walk hand in hand, Israel's military chief of staff recently said this to a Saudi-owned publication. We are ready to exchange experiences with Saudi Arabia and other moderate Arab countries and exchange intelligence information to confront Iran. There are many shared interests between us and Saudi Arabia. Now that Riyadh and Tel Aviv have pretty much slid into each other's DM, could this mean the Saudis are ready to go public with their new bromance? Not so fast. The Saudi king tried to walk back his son's comments. The country's rep at the Arab League condemned Israel for the killing of Palestinian protesters in last week's mass protest on the Gaza-Israel border.
Saudi Arabia strongly condemns this brutal massacre, which is considered a flagrant violation of international resolutions and conventions.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas thanked King Salman for his support. More likely, whatever this relationship develops into, it will be a litmus test to see how befriending a common foe would go over in the Arab world. It appears likely, though, that the kingdom and the Israeli state hope to normalize ties. The question is, what does this blossoming relationship mean for the region? The Saudis will have to sell it as advancing the Palestinian cause. But the two also have a common ally. U.S. President Donald Trump's first foreign trip included Saudi Arabia and Israel. Not surprisingly, all three share a common enemy. Yep. Soon after, Trump famously decided to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, further inflaming tensions in the region. While the lines in the sand continue to be redrawn, for now, this relationship between regional powers is much like a Facebook status. It's complicated. Adil Halim, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from Alpine, Texas by Ali Abu Nema. He's the co-founder of pro-Palestinian website The Electronic Intifada. In Burke, Virginia, we have Imad Harb. He's the Director of Research and Analysis at the Arab Center in Washington, D.C. And completing our panel in London is Charlie Wolf. He's a broadcaster and political commentator. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Ali, let me begin with you. So Mohammed bin Salman's comments about Israel, is it the major breakthrough that it's made out to be?
No, because Mohammed bin Salman doesn't speak for the Palestinian people. I'm not even sure he speaks for the Saudi people. Palestinians can speak for themselves, and they haven't agreed to give up their land. And I think it's particularly noxious for people to be celebrating his comments at a time when the world is silent at Israel's premeditated massacre of civilian demonstrators in Gaza. And that's something that Human Rights Watch investigation just came out with about the premeditated targeting of civilian demonstrators and likely to happen again tomorrow. And I feel like comments like the ones from Mohammed bin Salman simply fuel the sense of Israeli impunity and entitlement and encourage the kinds of crimes we're seeing in Gaza.
Right. Ali, before I bring the others in, let me then ask you if you believe that this signals a shift, that the Saudis have, I guess, abandoned any support of the Palestinian cause.
What it represents is that the Saudi regime, as other Gulf regimes, including the United Arab Emirates and Qatar and others, have had sort of clandestine or illicit relationships with Israel for many years. What it signals is them coming out of the closet, so to speak, embracing Israel openly, on the basis that Israel, as a Jewish sectarian state, has common interests with these so-called Sunni Arab states on a sectarian basis against Iran. And from the Israeli perspective, Israel has always relied on undemocratic Arab regimes in the surrounding region to help it maintain its position and to help it maintain its occupation of the Palestinians. Right. So yes, those regimes do still pay lip service to the Palestinian cause, and some of them indeed provide humanitarian aid. But the issue is not one of humanitarian aid. The issue is one of political support to end Israel's regime of occupation, settler colonialism, and apartheid, which we see in its most brutal form in Gaza, of shoot-to-kill orders against tens of thousands of unarmed Palestinians simply marching for their rights, and at the same time, Israeli propaganda trying to justify these killings by portraying these people marching for their rights as if they're terrorists.
Okay, let me bring in Charlie Wolf. Charlie, Ali made the point that it's particularly noxious to him that we're seeing this interpretation of there being a sort of Saudi-Israeli thaw at this moment in time. And anyway, if the Israelis are going to have allies in the region, why are they in an alliance with a country that pumps out arguably the most anti-Semitic stuff around the world, much more arguably than Iran does?
Well, first off, when you're speaking about premeditated, it seems if anything was premeditated, it was the leadership, the Hamas leadership, putting tens of thousands. I'm glad he used that. I can quote him now. Tens of thousands of people on a border. You know, if you're defending a border, you have a right to do whatever it takes. And again, tens of thousands, whether they're armed or unarmed, that's a lot of people, and that can be a dangerous situation. So I think Israel acted within its rights. Again, you know, if Hamas wasn't provocating like that, maybe we'd be moving along.
What was the provocation? How are people demanding their rights provoking you?
Well, let me make my statement, and we can move on from there. You know, whether the statement by bin Salman is of importance, it's a shift or not, we don't know. I mean, the Saudis kind of take care of the Saudis, and they do play both sides of the street. I'm sure we're probably all going to agree on that. But it's better than nothing at all. I think, you know, for the sake of the Palestinians, I think I can say that I'm actually in common cause with the other two gentlemen. I mean, we'd all like to see peace, and I'd like to see a prosperous Palestinian state. But again, as long as they're being led by Hamas, they don't seem to be, you know, making the right moves. I don't think the Hamas is serving them well.
What about 2 million people besieged in Gaza? Do they have rights? Do 2 million people in Gaza?
But again, Israel has a right to protect itself and defend itself. And I think that I'd rather hear
civilian protesters. The shoot-to-kill orders were very, very clear.
They have a right to the land that they're on, to be recognized and not to hear statements of, river to the sea.
Okay, fair enough. So we've got both perspectives on Gaza right now. If you guys would allow me, just for a second, to put a lid on it for a second, because I want to go back to the Saudi element with Imad. I want to focus on this. Imad, is this a shift, or has this always been business as usual, that the Israelis and the Saudis have had this weird sort of alliance because enemy of my enemy is my friend? They both recognize, from their perspective, an Iranian threat. Mohammed bin Salman is just articulating it to Jeffrey Goldberg.
This is definitely a shift in Saudi policy, yes. The Saudi state, as far as I'm concerned, the Saudi institutions are not necessarily there yet. In other words, the Saudi institutions reflect a long-held foreign policy of Saudi Arabia and the Arab world that says that the peace with Israel, so to speak, is going to be built upon the the proper addressing of the national rights of the Palestinian people. So when Mohammed bin Salman says what he says, he's basically really shifting the Saudi position from one that depends on addressing the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people to one that really gives Israel and the Israeli Zionist propaganda, so to speak, or the original idea of Zionism that God gave this land to the Jews, and now the Jews all have the right to that land. That's exactly how the Arab world, that's exactly how the Saudi Arabian institutions are interpreting what MBS said.
So, Ali, we tried to get scores of Saudis onto the show. We invited a lot of Saudis. All of them declined. They didn't want to come onto the program. So let me be the Saudi for the sake of this argument, for the sake of this next question. So we have the king, Mohammed bin Salman's father, coming out, maybe it was damage control, coming out afterwards, reaffirming the kingdom's steadfast position towards the Palestinian issue and the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people to an independent state with Jerusalem as its capital. And to add to that, the Saudis will go, oh, come on, we had the 2002 Saudi peace plan. We were driving that, the Mecca agreement in 2007, where we brought Hamas and Fatah to the table. We have been integral to trying to solve this issue, whether it's in terms of 2 states, 1 state, whatever. We want peace. How would you respond to that?
Well, I agree that the 2002 so-called Arab Peace Initiative was a far-reaching and generous offer that Israel rejected, as it has rejected every single generous offer. This peace initiative, sponsored by the Saudis, said to Israel that, look, you can have normalized relations with the entire Arab world, even the whole Muslim world, in exchange for withdrawing from just a fraction of historic Palestine, the 22% occupied in 1967, and letting Palestinians have a state there. And in the 15 years since that peace initiative, Israel has delivered its answer, which is a very hard and firm no, which has come not merely with a verbal rejection, but with rejection in fact by Israel's continued violent colonization of the West Bank, its ongoing theft of land for the construction of Jewish-only settlements on occupied territory, something the entire world considers to be illegal, and its siege of Gaza, which Israel makes very clear. The reason 2 million Palestinians are caged into the Gaza Strip, a giant ghetto, which should offend anyone with a sense of history and a sense of justice, the reason that Palestinians are caged in there is simply because they're not Jewish. And Israel defines itself as a Jewish state in which indigenous Palestinians represent a so-called demographic threat. I think the message after 15 years of Israeli further rejectionism is not to coddle Israel more and offer it more concessions as the Saudis are doing. It is to hold it accountable. It is to impose sanctions on it so that it stops its criminal enterprise in the West Bank, ends its siege of Gaza, and begins to respect Palestinian rights.
Okay.
Yes.
Charlie Wolf, is there anything in that you agree with?
No. It was a very masterful turnaround of reality, but no, I think he's taken every...
You can't challenge one fact.
On its head. I mean, no, it really has been, you really turned everything right around on its head. You're calling them a terrorist state, yet they have an army that is controlled by a civilian, independently elected legislature and an executive They have a court system.
Those are the ones of the Turkish Prime Minister.
Hold on, Arabs serve at every level. Arabs have served at every level of the Israeli state, including, I think there was a gentleman, an Arab, or I think it was Druze, who was president for a time when the current president couldn't hold his office. We've had generals who are Arabs, etc. So, you know, it's time we kind of got back to planet reality, and then maybe there'd be a chance at peace. You know, once we kind of drop the hatred and what have you, and, you know, you talk about this.
Do you think it's hatred to oppose military occupation?
The Jews are a tribal people, that is the children of Israel. So that's why Jews live there. But Arabs and Christians and everybody can live in Israel with no problem. Yet, you know, you talk about these settlements that, or you talk about the lands that the Palestinians want to start their state on. That's going to be a one state, or one, you know, no Jews allowed, Jude free. So I don't know why that never gets addressed. You know, if Jews want to stay,
do you think I have a
Palestinian state?
Can I ask you a question, Charlie? Can I ask you a question, Charlie?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. Do you think that it's hatred and anti-Semitism to oppose military occupation, to oppose Israel's 65 laws that discriminate against Palestinians for not being Jewish? Do you think it's hatred and anti-Semitism for B'Tselem to call on Israeli soldiers to disobey illegal orders to shoot at unarmed demonstrators, as B'Tselem have done? Do you think all that just amounts to hatred and incitement?
Well, B'Tselem is a bit of a radical group, but I'll say this much: at least in Israel, you can have radical.
No, I'm asking you to give me is Human Rights Watch also a radical anti-Israel organization?
10,000 people show up on your border. You have a right to protect yourself.
So we're back. Okay, we're back to 10,000 people on the border. Okay, I don't want to go around in circles. Okay, Charlie doesn't want to. Okay, fair enough, Charlie. Imad, we're running out of time. Imad, I want
a single point.
Okay, fair enough. Imad, I want you to wrap us up a little bit.
I'd rather look at the big picture and try and find peace between the peoples.
Okay, hold on. So Imad,
I think it's
Imad, big picture. Let's try and
through occupation and land theft.
Ali is not going to answer your question.
Peace and occupation.
Ali doesn't want to answer your questions directly. Imad. Okay, Imad, big picture. Going back to the beginning, as we circle back to the beginning, and this will have to be the final answer because I'm out of time and I have to move on. Imad, are we seeing the fault lines being clearer now in the region? So we're seeing the Saudis, perhaps the Americans, the Israelis, the other Gulf states and others, the Iranians, maybe the Turks, the Palestinians finding their support there, and others, and maybe even the Russians. Is that what's happening vis-a-vis the Palestinian issue?
I honestly don't see any fault lines really being drawn here. I think that the MBS is speaking for himself as far as I'm concerned. MBS is speaking for himself. He is trying to basically curry favor with the Trump administration and the present Israeli government. I don't see the Arab world really going along with whatever Saudi Arabia is trying to do right now regarding the Palestinian issue. You know, polls show that the Arab world is still solidly behind the Palestinian cause. There's still, you know, 80, 90% who are still looking for a just and legitimate solution and that addresses the legitimate concerns of the Palestinian people.
Ali Abu Nima, Charlie Wolf and Imad Harb, I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers. She may have survived the Holocaust, but Mirel Knoll would still lose her life to a barbaric act. The 85-year-old was stabbed 11 times and her apartment set alight by a neighbor and an accomplice. When the two were arrested, it emerged one had told the other, she's a Jew, she must have money. Her murder is being treated as an anti-Semitic hate crime, and thousands of people marched through the streets of Paris in her memory. And while most were welcome, the arrival of National Front leader Marine Le Pen was met with boos. The crowd was so hostile she was forced to leave. Many at the protest accused her party of having anti-Semites in its ranks. So is it true? Well, let's ask a member of the National Front Party, or Front National, Patricia Chagnon. She joins us from Abbeville in France. Patricia, good to have you on the Newsmakers. Those other marchers did not want Marine Le Pen there. They heckled her and she had to leave. You can fully understand why, can't you? She didn't need to be there.
It was very important. She was at the Marche Blanche, at the White March in Paris. As a matter of fact, it was the CRIF, the Jewish umbrella organization in France, that had actually asked her not to come. Do remember that Mireille Knoll's own son actually said everybody was welcome. Marine Le Pen was there to show that there is definitely, if there should have been any confusions within the past, there is no confusion at all today as to our stance and her stance as rejecting totally and for 100% anti-Semitism in France.
So why do you think those people were so angry? Was it just in their heads? Or might it be that your party is still seen as a heavy, far-right anti-Semitic party in France right now?
Well, let's talk about anti-Semitism in France. Anti-Semitism in France is not a general feeling. Anti-Semitism has been used and has been fueled by different groups promoting their ideas. It was used in the 19th century by anti-capitalist movements. It was also fueled after the Second World War by pro-Palestinian movements. It was then fueled by and sustained by the left and promoted by the left.
Certainly,
by certain left-wing
parties. It was also fueled and sustained by the founder of Front National, Jean-Marie Le Pen, the man who said the Nazi gas chambers were a detail of history, right? But I don't even want to talk about him. Let's put him in the past because he was kicked out of the party. Fair enough. Can I talk about last year?
Exactly.
Okay, so I've got a few examples from last year. Can I give you some examples from last year during the elections, right? National Front candidate. Let me quote you, a National Front candidate. They continue to fill our ears about the Shoah. I know loads of people who don't particularly like Jews, especially amongst Catholics. You know why? It's because it's the Jews who killed Jesus. Let me give you Benoit Louellette, head of Front National in Nice.
No, listen, I can't. No. I don't want to. I don't want to listen to that. I think Marine's presence.
I want our viewers to understand why people were heckling Marine Le Pen. So hold on for a second. Benoit Louellette, head of Front National in Nice, secretly filmed in a documentary. I don't think there were that many deaths during the Shoah. Okay. Another candidate running for office. So what? What are 2,000 years anyway?
I will explain this to you.
There may be problems of the Catholic vis-a-vis the Jew. Let me give you one final one. Hold on, ma'am. One final one. Catherine Blaine. Whether on Islam, Jews, or homosexuality, it's a sign of total degeneration. And credit to the party, you kicked out of the party, and that's fine. But the point is, these people go, they see this Holocaust survivor killed.
Is this an interview?
Yes, it's an interview.
And are you trying to actually... All right, so can I answer you,
So the question's coming. So you're listening, right?
Okay.
So this all happened last year. We said Jean-Marie Le Pen said terrible things about the gas chambers. That was a long, long time ago. Fine, we put him away. But all of this stuff that I quoted you happened last year. So you're telling me that those other marchers who said, get out of our march, how dare you come here when members of your own party say these terrible things about Jews all the time, and suddenly you want to show up in solidarity when your party is littered with anti-Semitism. That's the point. Don't you understand them?
We have a party leader, and she's called Marine Le Pen. She has definitely taken a huge, made a breach with the past of her party. She has been excluding people with anti-Semitic views in our party. And I think the mere fact that she went and showed up definitely shows that the views that she holds and definitely condemns anti-Semitism. What the problem is here today is that you are blaming the finger, you're pointing the finger at the wrong person.
Who should I be pointing at?
Anti-Semitism, those fueling anti-Semitism today in France are the radical Islamists in France who have been feeding off anti-Semitism.
But we talk about that on that show. Hold on. We talk about that, and when we have Islamist leaders on the show, we hold them to account. So just to be clear, when we have Islamist leaders on the show, we hold them to account, and we talk about things done in their name.
I certainly hope so.
I'm saying Marine Le Pen goes to this rally. I'm quoting you direct anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial, not from the 1970s or 80s, but from last year. And I'm saying, you say there's a clear divide between the past and the present.
There is a...
But there isn't.
Yes,
this was happening by candidates last year.
Well, listen. Many parties have people saying things that the direction does not approve. So let's talk about the more serious issues and why anti-Semitism is so rampant in France. That is the question. The question is, why is insecurity in France so big? And anti-Semitism needs to be linked to the total sentiment and ramping insecurity that is wreaking havoc in our country today, and which successive governments and Mr. Macron's government has not been able to curtail. Since 2006, 11 people have been killed because of the Jewish faith. But since 2013, 245 deaths can be attributed to Islamic terrorists in France, and over 900 people were wounded. Our French countrymen of Jewish faith have been saying that they are being targeted, the first targeted by those who do not no longer respect the rules of our republic. And we definitely agree with that. And that's why we stand up and defend our fellow countrymen against the hatred which is being spread in our country by the radical Islamists. And they are on the forefront. So let's not forget the origins of that. And if today Mr. Macron needs to realize that serious measures need to be taken to curtail the violence that is rampant and the insecurity that's rampant in our country on the one hand, but also radical Islam needs to be curtailed. Mr. Macron cannot go on saying, yes, I think radical Islam is the insidious enemy of our country, while he just allowed a week ago the Congress of the Islamic organizations in Le Bourget in France. No, it is time to dismantle radical Islamist societies and organizations in our countries, to close radical Islamic mosques, and to once and for all not only play lip service to anti-radical Islam, but also to prove and to take concrete measures. And I think the two are completely linked. Violence, rampant violence, where there are territories today in France where the rules of France and the rules of law no longer apply. We need to get those back.
Just to be absolutely clear, very finely, all those things that I mentioned from last year, you condemn them, right? Completely and utterly.
I condemn any anti-Semitic attitudes, of course. We are one nation, we are one people, we are French. We believe in our secular state. We believe that religion belongs to the private sphere, and we are one people, a French people, regardless of religion. And that is very important to maintain the harmony and the cohesion in our society.
Okay, Patricia Chagnon, I hope you'll come back on the Newsmakers. I enjoyed talking to you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And that's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Until next time, thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.